Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us once again for the 1123 Presents podcast. This is a podcast where we will cover lots of subjects: advertising, creativity, analytics, media, placement, campaigns, branding, and probably some miscellaneous along the way. Definitely some if I have anything to say about it. I am your host, Dave DeStefano. I am the Chief Creative Officer and partner at 1123. My partner Shayna and I started the agency in 2013, and this podcast is part of a rebrand from a 10-year anniversary. We've been wanting to do this for a while, and we're finally getting our poop in a pile, so to speak, and we're doing it. With me today is our art director and copywriter, Alex Carter. Alex, thanks for joining. Today we're going to talk a little bit about creativity under constraints. Some folks, if you'll agree with me or you don't, you can tell me, but I think some folks, they think that's a strength almost. Like, it's like, I have to be under pressure in order to create something great. This is what happens. Like, I do this and maybe you procrastinate. That becomes a strength instead of like, it becomes a quirk that gives them production. But other folks are, no, I've got to have, this space, I've got to have this room to create and to sit, to tell everybody, hold for a minute while I do this. I know I'm one and you're probably the other. So what do you think? Let's launch off with that. Which one are you? Mm-hmm.
I think that's one area to constraints for sure.
Yeah.
I think there's other things as well. Pretty much anything that limits possibilities, right?
Right.
And sometimes that's a brand guide, client expectations, budget, obviously time frame.
Yep.
There's probably more factors than that I'm just aren't coming to mind right now, but there's tons of constraints. Specifically on the time thing, I definitely think what you were referring to is you typically like to move a little faster, and I typically like to move a little, I would say slower, maybe not, crawling, but I definitely like to make sure things are thought through. I think the idea behind that is if we're launching a project and somebody's initial reaction is, oh, did you think of doing it this way? I want our answer to be, yes, we actually took that into consideration and chose not to, rather than, oh, wow, that's a great idea. Why didn't we think of that?
100%.
And so I'm just trying to kind of work from that, avoid that scenario when I'm working through a process. But I think aside from time, the other constraints should also be taken into account. Again, budget, scope of the work,
resources,
resource constraints. Time is one of those, of course, but
yeah, that makes sense. What do you think about the fact that, like, the point of view of, well, and first of all, yeah, you're right. I mean, time was the first one. The budgetary thing we run into all the time. I mean, we're an agency, we have clients that are different levels, and that's nobody's fault. Like, it's a thing that happens. So, what makes us good at our job is that we're able to assess where that's at and go, okay, well, I mean, if we're not, if I'm not dragging Dwayne Johnson into this thing for a commercial shoot, then we're going to come back and have, it's a voiceover and this is that. I think the versatility there, that breeds versatility. If you're not versatile when it comes to these things, learning not only creatively how to make something or write something that's going to further whatever brand we're trying to further, or sell a product or whatever, you're also going, okay, I have to creatively look at the constraints. That's a creative skill too.
Yeah. I think too, when you get into, you talk about dealing with constraints, it's all about expectation, because you can go in with budget constraints, time constraints, and if you set, if the client or whoever is expecting Dwayne Johnson, then they're not going to be happy.
Yeah.
But there's really creative things that we can do. There have been multi-million-dollar campaigns that have been done. You have a single shot.
Yeah.
Right. That's the whole premise to it. Like if there's successful, some of the most successful TV ads, it's just one shot. You could walk in and do the whole thing and And I'm not talking about like elaborate oneers either. I'm talking about just well-conceived spots that are, a shot or a statement. Because the constraints help you discover what that is, but then sometimes there are no constraints. And I guess that's almost harder, right? When there's no constraints, you can do anything. Yeah. Then you're like, oh my gosh, you lack focus at that point.
Yeah, that's one thing I was going to say later on is like, when it's wide open, that's almost worse. I think that for me, I mean, I'm the guy that, of course I can come up with something on the spot, and with quick data, quick detail, here, this is this, and we need to do this. Oh, why don't we just do that? I'm into, like, a lot of times the simplest answer is the best one a lot.
Sometimes there's constraints built in. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you need to build in constraints. Sure. And I think when you're directing a project from a creative director perspective, you need to know when to draw that line. And my question would be kind of, where do you, we need to introduce some artificial constraints, or the constraints are here. How do we deal with them?
I think a lot of times for me is like, in my brain, and I know this is a pat answer, but like, I do think about this, is like, is this what the client is expecting? Is this what they want out of this? Is this going to achieve what they're expecting? If we're doing a whole lot of extra, pardon me, bullshit, and we're not actually doing, and we could boil things down, I think that's where my alarms go off in my head and go, we don't need to do all this. Yeah. They said they're looking for X. We know how to do that. We know what this is. So, I mean, for me, I've got a great example, and we can talk about that in a minute, because I want to bounce this back to you. But I think the client's goals and what we're achieving, I think a lot of times, I have that on my mind, and I'm like, that we don't need to do all this. This is extra. This is extra. This isn't. We've had chances, like you and I have worked on campaigns where it's been kind of wide open. We've had a nonprofit that we worked on in the spring, I think, where we had a lot of latitude to create whatever. And as I hit the radiator, the campaign ends up being simple, but because we thought about it and thought, this is all that needs to be done, this is what says the message clean. And I think that, for me, I want that out of everything we do. There are definitely projects that I know I've worked on in the past, in whether it's a design thing we have, or it's video or whatever, where I've definitely felt like, well, the client's expecting more elaborate something or whatever. You have a discussion with them about that, but you definitely know, I guess, knowing client expectations is part of this. Like, if you know what they're expecting, that's a constraint. If you know how much time you have to do it, that's a constraint. Budget, that's a constraint. Budget's always a constraint. But like, I think that's, to me, those things it all ties back to the client. I think that has to be a conscious question, of like, do we really have to add this stuff on? Do we need these extra things? What does it do? Okay, well, if it's like, well, we're already here and we've accomplished X, or we're going to, with, however many impressions or people reached, or, have confidence in our data, then no, Yeah. What's the best here?
I like that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. What's the best?
Yeah. And I've got an example talking about, we had a production shoot. We've had a couple of production shoots where I think the possibility of extras is always there. We can throw the kitchen sink at you if you want. Right. But for some things, the client, they're like, we want to dial this down. We want to dial this down. It needs to be simpler. It needs to look like this. Okay. Lots of discussions happen in pre-pro where it's like, we could add this. I could have an extra camera here. I could do this or that. And it was like, yeah, but we don't need to. We actually don't need to. And for me, what happens is you accomplish what we do a great job. The team accomplishes what the client wants. The client's ecstatic, and that's where you get your extra money later. Like, this is sort of an investment in stewardship. You don't have, you're not like, give me it all right now, because, I don't know if this doesn't work. No, we didn't need to do that. We accomplished what we're doing. We got the message across, and look how good this is. Yeah, it's great. Let's go do some more. Yep. That's the kind of relationship I think that I want, I know Shayna wants out of our agency with clients. Yeah. So, all right, for you though, because I'm talking a whole lot. Let's talk about unexpected creative opportunities. I mean, I don't know if you've got an example or like as far as like an opinion about this, but a lot of these things, these constraints, a lot of times feed. I mentioned the time thing, but it could be budget, it could be whatever. It feeds. I think in some people it sparks them to creatively solve a problem, and then
Yeah.
you end up with, you know, something really cool that you wouldn't have landed on if you had all this time or all this money. How do you feel about that?
I mean, I think unexpected is one of the best things. I think it's really easy to you're given parameters for a project, and it's really easy to get pessimistic about that. And you can complain, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough time, we don't have whatever the constraint is. It's easy to complain.
Right.
But I think the more effective strategy and what's more valuable to clients and to the outcome of what we're making is to approach it more from, okay, what opportunities could we get out of these constraints? And when you start looking for opportunities, then it opens up a whole new world. And I think the challenge then becomes, once you've established that baseline or that mindset, how do we keep these opportunities alive? So in that process, coming from client, going to, you know, account executive, going to, you know, making its way into creative and then working its way down through the department. It's how do we keep those opportunities alive? Because it's super easy to, we talked at the beginning about killing ideas, but it's super easy to squash, you know, possibilities and to really almost lock yourself in or box yourself in unnecessarily. And so, yeah, that's always the thought that I'm having is how are we keeping opportunities alive? Because a lot of times the best solutions are the ones that you just happen upon.
Right.
And those are the ones that they're not really pre-planned. They're not, you know, kitschy, or they're unique. They make everybody in the agency and hopefully the client say, "Wow, how did you guys come up with that?"
Right.
And then, you know, you can grow from there. But yeah, I don't think constraints are necessarily a bad thing. Obviously, everybody wishes they had more time and more money, but
Sure.
you know, it's up to you. It's up to us how we choose to view those things. And then, you know, if we create good work, then hopefully the clients will see that. And I think the key to doing that is not squashing those opportunities before you get to implement them into the process. Do you have any examples that, you know, that come to mind about, you know, when maybe an opportunity was something that didn't seem like a solution at first ends up being, maybe it's the byproduct of constraint, or something that didn't seem like a good solution right out of the gate turns out to be the answer to the problem?
Well, I do. We talked about our logo.
Yeah.
I mean, our logo was one of those examples.
That's what came to mind with me too.
Yeah. I mean, I talked about that with them in another episode, but I think the logo itself, you know, that's a great example of like all this time went by and the creative process went through, and I'll even, like I said, I'll even say I was like, okay, we're set. We're good. Let's go forward. And then it was like, oh, but if we look at it this way with this older logo that's been sitting there on the contact sheet in the file,
cutting room floor.
Yeah, it's been on a file full of like, you know, 100 other logos. All of a sudden it's like, oh, if we revisit that, then this completely taps into everything we've been trying to talk about message wise and everything else. Like, oh my God, it's been there the whole time. So that's a great example of like that working out. I do think you can have some analysis paralysis about this. You can second guess yourself to death, but once it's analyzing like, okay, it's just like I said with the client stuff. With this, it was, what is our meaning? What is this supposed to say about us? What does this thing represent? How, you know, is it clear enough and all those things? Is it checking all the boxes? Well, we had a couple of logos and then we had this one. And when we went back to it, it was like, actually, this does check all those.
Checks every box.
So in that situation, that was it was like, okay, this was worth going back and redoing, even though it was really uncomfortable to go back to everybody and go, hey, guess what? Remember the one you saw? That's not the one.
Yeah.
So,
well, let me ask you, sorry to add one more thing,
you're fine.
but this just popped into my head.
No, go ahead and host. You're good.
How would you approach a client in that situation? Because that suddenly, you know, I think the benefit of the logo was it was more internal, right?
Yeah.
But if you've gone to a client and you come back, I mean, this is probably more of a hypothetical case study, but you go to a client and you say, hey, this is what we've decided on. And then it becomes abundantly clear in the day or so after,
Right.
this other one that we didn't think was the best is actually the best for, going back to what the client expectations are. This is going to fulfill those expectations the best. How would we approach that?
I think that is a thought. I think it depends on where we're at with the client. I think this goes back to creative and like sort of the artistic integrity, the artistic side of things and the corporate side of things, or the commercial side of things merging, having a good dialogue. I think if we have a good dialogue with our client, and if it's a brand new client, it's probably a harder sell to be like, hey, I know I took you down this road, but now I'm going to turn. That would be really hard for me, and I would have to really do some convincing, I think, and to myself to be like, I'm comfortable with telling this person, let's do that.
Yeah.
With a lot of our clients, we have a lot of long-standing relationships where they know we've been able to navigate things with them, adjust, media campaigns and all that. And as a matter of fact, if you look at media campaigns now and digital and testing and versioning, that's literally something we do organically on that side of the business.
Right.
We look and, okay, well, this one, we thought these two would work. These are both options. Now this one is working more than we thought with this copy. So let's merge those together. Yep. Hey, client, guess what? This is actually achieving more, and here's why. And if you give them the why, you're good.
Yeah.
That might be the key, I think. Maybe
I think you're right.
Just find them the why and be like, this is why. I'm not doing this just because I'm changing my mind.
Yeah.
Not just because I'm uncomfortable and I don't have a rational reason. Actually, you do. I think I like, and I know maybe this isn't something that maybe you don't subscribe to this, but I think that there's always there should be a really good why as to why you're changing something like that.
Right. And that's where it's difficult on the creative side, right? Because when you're on the analytics side, you're like, why? Yeah. Because we've been doing this for a while and there's a really strong gut intuition.
Right.
And, like you and I can we've built a trust in each other's intuition, but then with the newer and, older clients, but with a newer client, it's like, why? You don't have that analytic data set to be like, well, this is why you get twice as many clicks or It's more like, because the feelings are right.
Because the feelings. I think, it's a...
I marked this down. I'm like, we got to ask a client this at one point, what they're seeing from their side.
Yeah, I think somebody we know would be, I got somebody in mind to ask that question to, and it would probably be really good. I think they hired us, or they came to us, usually in our case, it's a lot of recommendation. A lot of our clients come because other clients know us and have worked with us, and they go, hey, you got to work with these guys. Here's why. They did this for me, or they did that for me. We get a lot of good... we get a lot of contacts and hits, but we get, that. And so I think, the trust is there. We could sit there and we could go back to a client and say, yeah, okay, so you hired us because you know what we're doing, or we know what we're doing. This is what we're seeing. We better fix this now. We better pivot this now.
Yeah. And
here's why. How do you feel? Now, that can go two ways. You could have a new client look at you and go like, are you kidding me right now? Yeah. Like, all these emails and calls and meetings, and like, you're wasting my time.
Yeah.
Or you could have somebody who looks at it and goes, this is part of the process. And, go back to, whatever company made changes to their logo or whatever and had to switch it back quick because they didn't realize, hey, it's part of the creative process. It's part of, and I say creative process, it's more than that.
Well, you use the Gap example. It makes me wonder, was anybody like, I don't feel good about this?
I don't know.
During that,
I'm sure there was.
Because I think, and this is coming from, and like, I think you and I might have different perspectives, but I'll look at things and I'm like, I almost wish that there was more accountability on the creative side to be like, hey, like, this might not be the best solution. Or like, I feel like a lot of times what'll happen, definitely at bigger agencies, and we've both seen this, is they will support an idea or present an idea, and even if it's not the best, they'll back it because of some kind of political reason or something that's not focused on the. I mean, you get to bigger agencies, there's a lot of politics, and it's
Totally.
like
Oh,
it's
totally.
not the best solution, but we're politically stuck here. We're gonna keep pushing this as if it's the only idea. And I almost wish that there was more accountability on the agency side. And I think we've done a decent job at this. Is like
Right.
you show the accountability of like, look, we get it wrong sometimes, but in the long run, you're a lot better off. You're a lot better off taking that honest way rather than just trying to
Yeah.
explain.
Don't you think? I mean, I think this is really case by case. Like,
Oh,
and that's just
absolutely.
kind of my personality, maybe. But like, I think sometimes there's just nothing you can do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know.
Well,
like,
and
when you
sometimes you're too far down, like you're too close to the deadline.
Right.
Right. And
Right.
it's like, look, we're here.
yeah.
Let's do the best work we can do.
Yeah.
And-
I can say we don't run into that a lot. There's a lot, I think, on our side of in our agency that we don't leave a lot of air for like, oh no, we got it so wrong, we have to shift at the end of this. Like, I don't mind shifting. Like, making mistakes is part of life, and I think part of us learning, even with our clients, like our client may have an idea when they meet with us for discovery, right?
Yeah.
And then we go, okay, yeah, that sounds like it might work. And then, maybe it's not so late in the process. It's like halfway through and we go, yeah, you really should do this or do this.
Yeah.
I've had plenty of clients that look at me and say they want,
XYZ. and
well,
then-
or a whole bunch of direct mail for something that doesn't,
Yeah.
that's the only thing I can think of is like, I want all this direct mail. I want to do all this. Okay.
Yeah.
So the return on investment nowadays for that is rough. Like, if you want to do that, you're going to have to really put a whole bunch of budget to that. We could do that better if we had this delivered
we did
digitally, if
something,
there was, there was targeted ads or there's anything like that, behavioral stuff. It's just, that's a little bit of an old fashioned approach. I think it works. Direct mail is great when you're sending coupons. It's great.
Yeah.
But, that's,
Even coupons though. Like I can't
Yeah.
remember the last time I've
yeah.
taken the coupons and
I think you said accountability, didn't you, about agencies?
yeah, accountability and just that. Yeah. Being able to almost admit this is, I don't want to turn this.
Do you
into
think
like
that's the right
a
word?
Toot your own horn thing, but I do think this is an advantage of having a smaller agency, a more self-contained unit, because you're not dealing with as much of the political turmoil, and it's a big value proposition, a massive value proposition.
Yeah.
Because I mean, when you're dealing with something that's large, it's a lot harder to get that granular. I think accountability, and just to kind of clarify what I'm thinking of when I say accountability, it's just being able to step up and be like, got it wrong. We're human. It happens, but realistically, I think long term this would be a better option.
There's so many times I think where that is, and maybe it's just a marketplace thing or old school business.
Yeah.
That is seen as weakness. I think.
Yeah. Do you think
And-
that's changing?
It depends on the client. It's case by case. I'm telling you. Like, I can't say that societally it is. I would love it. My problem is, I think, if I'm going to get into a social commentary on things,
Yeah.
like, society in and of itself is getting worse at accountability.
Yeah.
We've seen a lot of that all over the place in past years, and like, it doesn't matter how you messed up or said something wrong. It's that other person's problem for calling me out, or if it's that other person's problem for. So no, I don't think it's getting better. I think it's, it puts more stress and pressure on businesses like ours to be like, okay, we don't want to come off like that. We want to make sure we've got our shit together, because if we do, then we don't have to go regroup.
Yeah.
I would love that to be always, but there has to be room for that. The way forward in that, I think, is just trust between client and agency.
Yeah.
And that accountability grows to where you have a relationship with somebody where, there's a couple clients I know I could text and be like, hey, I know I sent you this. What do you think of this? Hang on a second. Like, before we send this as final, because you're like, I love it. Let's try this. Do you like that?
And we've taken advantage of that a couple of times.
Yeah.
And not taken advantage in like a manipulative way, but like,
No, it's been useful.
yeah, absolutely
Yeah.
useful. And I think some of the best work has
Yeah.
come from that
Yeah.
kind of. How do you get to that point with a client? Do you think? Is
It's just you have to build trust.
reiterating and
You just have to build trust.
yeah.
New clients, it's really hard to do that. You may get thrown to the curb on that one. But like, I think if you build trust and you have a relationship with people, if they've been through some stuff with you as far as like campaigns and, yeah, there's a lot of clients that I can think of off the top of my head that we started with at 1123 and had, it was just that sort of grassroots starting. Like we were starting, they were smaller. We helped them grow. Once you get that longevity with a client, and it doesn't have to be like a decade. It's a couple of campaigns in, or you do a campaign, you have some success.
Yeah.
It opens up the ability for you to say like, hey, trust me on this. I don't think you want to do that, even though you feel like you should.
Yeah.
It's time. That really just takes time. It's just like any relationship between humans.
Yeah, absolutely.
It takes time.
It's hard to build that into your brand, but I think the best brands have been able to almost,
Right.
it's reputation,
Right.
right?
Right.
And that if there is a way to do it with a new client, it's to carry a reputation of, hey, this is how we do it. And, the best agencies are probably the ones that aren't afraid to take accountability. And, but also at the same time with a new client, they have that built-in trust to where
Right.
it's an interesting
I can't
thought experiment.
I can't say like this is the thing where like we're saying we have this sort of like you and I are talking about this for like, oh, we really wish that this would be like this sort of utopian, accountability and room and trust. Sometimes there's just nothing you can do.
Yeah. 100%.
Like there's a lot of instances I've heard from other people in the past that I've worked with at agencies, myself and Shayna on this journey with the agency we have. Sometimes it's just like a completely outside factor just shuts it down and they're like, nah, and we're going a different way. And then you're like, whoa, what? Like look at all of the longevity, look at all of the success. And they're like, yeah, we don't feel like it.
Yeah.
And that would be it. Like, I don't love that, but I think that's part of agency life that's, definitely builds my anxiety. But I think that's hard because as somebody who has sort of an ideal about like, if I do a good job personally with a person and I build that rapport and that trust, they're going to trust us. And even if we're going a way that they don't think, they have the strength to say, or they have the room to say, I don't like this. You shouldn't do that.
Yep.
And we have the same room.
Absolutely.
So,
it's a true collaboration more than
you wish for that.
Yeah.
But sometimes it doesn't that way. And change is never like, usually it's not always like, what a great change.
Yeah.
Change is usually like, now I got to do this different. I'm used to this.
Yeah.
I'm definitely a creature of habit with things. And so I don't, it's a conscious effort to be like, no, push, think, like, consider these things.
Yeah.
Don't just be like, no,
Absolutely.
because you may miss some really great nugget of input from somewhere, and then you're not growing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
But yeah. All right. Well, I mean, we should probably wrap up here. This has been a good convo.
I don't even know what we specifically covered, but we have like the outline here.
Yeah, for sure. These outlines, I don't think we're going to follow these much. So early episodes, kind of working out the kinks, folks. But anyway, Alex, thank you so much. This was a really cool convo.
Yeah. Enjoyed it.
Really appreciate it. And for everybody listening, please hit the thumbs up, the heart, whatever the little icon is that makes it so that you can see when we make more content so that you can listen to it more. Again, my name is Dave DeStefano, and this has been 1123 Presents, and we will get you next time.